Hi, my name's Rob Ryder, speaking out of Cornwall. This is a book I wrote with Patrick Quanton. I'll put a link below. A Conscious Humanity, Morality, Freedom and Natural Law. I'm going to try my best now to explain that concept of morality, freedom and natural law that we've tried in the book. As usual, me and Patrick, when we've worked together, we always simplify everything. Don't go too deep and just look at the principles. But it's important that you define what you're talking about. So these are some definitions of morality that are found in dictionaries. A set of principles guiding us to evaluate what is right and wrong and builds the personal character, reasonable behavior and choices of a person, as well as helping people to justify decisions, goals, actions all through life. A code of conduct given specific conditions would be put forward by all rational people. Morality can be a body of standards or principles derived from a code of conduct from a particular philosophy, religion, culture, or a standard that a person believes should be universal. Morality could be synonymous with goodness or rightness. Therefore, immorality could be a behavior that conscientiously goes against accepted morals, that is, the proper ideas and beliefs about how to behave in a way that is considered right and good by the majority of people. Immorality is often called wickedness and is a state avoided by good people, the quality of being in accord with the standards of right or good conduct. So they're the definitions of morality. The problem with these definitions is they're not defined really, because who states what is moral and immoral behavior? Who states that? So that's what I'm going to go on in a second. So the definition of natural law and man-made law, I've taken off Mark Passio, who I believe does the best presentations on natural law. So natural law, based upon principles and truth inherent to creation, harmonized with, due to knowledge and understanding, so the universal exists and applies everywhere in the universe, regardless of location. So natural law, we're talking about universal laws, which is basically kind of why we started with Patrick the series on creation and the universal laws. And these can't be changed, exist as long as the universe exists and cannot be changed, especially by human beings. So man-made law is based upon dogmatic beliefs, which are constructs of the mind, complied with due to fear of punishment, differ with location based upon with the whim of the legislators, which is called moral relativism, changes with time based upon the whim of the legislators. So we've got morality, which is this base of principles and behavior, but who decides what that is? Then we've got natural law and man-made law, again, supposed to be based on certain principles, but ultimately, what I believe, there is only universal law. So if you go back to my video a while back, the Matrix revealed regarding the natural map of the world and the political map. This is where we live. This is natural law. And the political map is all man-made stuff, constructs of the mind. The only thing that is real is natural law, so gravity. And nature has its own consequences that nature will give you. Now, if we go back to the conversation I had with Patrick regarding the formation of a human being, because everything's connected, you'll see you have nature and nurture. So at conception, you're made. And that will, because evolution is going one way and it wants to learn and progress, you kind of put on a life path, as it were. And then nurture is as you develop, you growing and learning, absorbing information that will incorporate and create a bigger picture of yourself, which will again send you on a life path where your true self wants to go. Your unconscious mind, as Patrick says, it wants to go somewhere and learn, because that's what evolution is, the evolution of consciousness via experience. So you're on a life path that is natural. So anything that gets in the way of that life path deliberately from another person who interferes with your life path, I would say that it would be immoral behavior. Yeah. We have religious institutions that claim to know morality and set standards of behaviors, but the people who have run these institutions for a long time, I would say, are immoral. And it's subjective morality, what they're putting forward. They're putting a set of standards of behavior that they apply to every single person, but we're all on an individual life path. So it's not for us to judge other people's behavior. You can judge it for yourself, but don't judge them, as long as it's consensual. So for me personally, all behavior goes as long as it's consensual. A couple of examples, obvious ones, would be violence. You know, if you've got two sadomasochists that want to meet up somewhere in private and beat the crap out of each other, good luck. How can that be immoral? If it's consensual, that's what they want to do. Who am I to interfere in their life path? Who am I to make that a crime if that's what they want to do? Now, we have sports that fill that need, like the UFC and boxing and things like that, that fulfill that need for some men to go into that and kind of get it organized and structured. But if, you know, people want to do that behind a warehouse and that's their thing, who am I to get in the way? Who am I to say no? If that's an inner need of theirs, if the universe wants to experience and express everything, that behavior might be uncomfortable for me, but I don't have to get involved with it. Nothing to do with me. Another one that especially religions push is homosexuality. Who am I to say that it's immoral? Like I said, not my cup of tea. Thank you very much. Don't want to get involved. But as long as no one's forcing themselves on me, and sexual activity is an expansion on that religions push. Sex outside of marriage is immoral. Well, marriage is a human construct. Sex is a natural thing. If a man and a woman want to have multiple sexual partners, if they want to go to orgies and it's all consensual, adults, nothing to do with me. Not my cup of tea, thank you, but nothing to do with me. So I can't judge that immoral unless somebody's being forced. All I can say, it's not my cup of tea. Now there's a grey area there with the age of consent. So that's where we kind of think a little bit and put our own opinions on. I would say in most of Western countries, 16 to 18 seems to be the age of consent. I would say that's fairly okay. You know, you have to, young adults have to have a freedom of expression once, and if they're educated in the consequences, you have to let people go sometime. So I would say 16 to 18 is about right. There are people within governments. Yeah, so remember, government isn't immoral. The people who run it are, who want to lower the age of consent, and these people have been lingering in about government for a long time. And we know with the sexualization of children in schools, it's a plan. I believe in the Vatican, I'm not 100% sure, but I think their age of consent used to be 12 and then it was upped. Now, these people are supposed to be celibate, and yet they had an age of consent of 12, which I would say is immoral. I would say is immoral. I'd say 16, pushing on to 18. I would say 18, but 16 to 18, I think, you know, that's where most people, reasonable people in my opinion, would say that's morally acceptable. So there are a couple of grey areas when you manifest morality into society when it comes to children, because there has to be an age of consent where, right, you're an adult now and you have to take responsibility. But there also has to be an age where, no, you're not really developed enough to make that. As a community, as a society, we need to protect people. That's kind of a grey area. So morality is a set of behaviors that the church give to everyone. But we don't know everybody's life path. We don't know what the universe wants to experience via every individual. So for me, and for Patrick, he's very non-judgmental on other people's behavior. Unbelievably non-judgmental. If it's right for you, it's right for you, regardless of what it is. If you're happy with it, if it's consensual, that's your life path, nothing to do with me. As long as you allow me to pursue my life path. And all we can make a judgment on other people's behavior is, oh, not my cup of tea, that isn't for me. But if that's for you, no problem. Go your own way. So that's how I understand morality. And what we're seeing is religion for many, many years has been tyrannical with morality, the most immoral people, in my opinion, who run these institutions. And they're defining it in very particular behaviors, which could be stopping somebody's life path, which I believe is what real morality is about. Then we have human rights. So people think, oh, we need more human rights. Humans have rights. But then you have not quite as simple as that. So we talk about human rights and natural rights. And the most famous human right is the UN Declaration of Human Rights, which starts off Article 1. All human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. They are endowed with reason and conscience and should act towards one another in a spirit of brotherhood. So if that's how it is and that's it, not bad really. Born free and equal in dignity and rights. That sounds great. When you go further into human rights, that's when it gets trickier, and I say real tyrannical. Human rights, what I'm saying is tyrannical. So Article 4, no one shall be held in slavery or servitude. Slavery and the slave trade shall be prohibited in all their forms. So slavery is prohibited. Sounds good. So forced to work and live in a system that you personally don't want to. But what these people don't include in that is debt slavery. Go back to my book, Debt Slavery. No mention of debt slavery. So according to the UN human rights, all forms of slavery are legal. Government itself is a form of slavery, yeah, because you're forced into it. So all forms of government are slavery. Well, they don't speak out about that. The monetary system is debt slavery. They don't speak about that. So the hypocrisy is unbelievable. No one shall be this is Article 5, no one shall be subjected to torture or to cruel, inhumane or degrading treatment or punishment. So I don't think that applies to the people in Guantanamo, and I don't think that applied to Julian Assange. So the cherry pick. Article 6, everyone has the right to recognition everywhere as a person before law. So you have a right to be regarded as a person and therefore a member of the official society. Therefore you now have an obligation. So we know, most people, and presume who listen to this video, the difference between a natural human being and a person. Person is a construct as a member of a society, but you're forced into it. You have no choice with the birth certificate, etc. We know that. So you have a right to be a person, but you're forced into it. Being a person, then you have to live under the obligations of whatever society you're a person in. So it's actually taking away rights, natural rights. Article 19, everyone has the right to freedom of opinion and expression. This right includes freedom to hold opinions without interference and to seek, receive, and impart information and ideas through any media and regardless of frontiers. So basically, though, like I think I did this chapter, we're basically only to free really to think what we are told and pursue official truths. You try freedom of expression, because this is all this hate crime, phobias, transphobia, homophobia, whatever your phobia, Islamophobia, xenophobia, to curtail freedom of speech. So your right to freedom of speech, well, opinions, as long as the other law of harm isn't broken. But who defines harm? Yeah. Again, all manipulation and going away from natural freedom of speech. So you have the right to freedom of speech as long as it doesn't offend somebody, which is a recent woke inclusion in this. Article 26. Everyone has the right to education. Education shall be free, at least in the elementary and fundamental stages. Elementary education shall be compulsory. Technical and professional education shall be made generally available, and higher education shall be equally accessible to all on the basis of merit. So again, everyone has a right to education. Define education for me. Be free and compulsory. So you have a right to education, and it's compulsory, means you have to have education. Now, with my wife being Peruvian and me living in Peru, as far as I know, the Incas never had any kind of formal written language, and they were well known to be some of the best engineers and builders and growers of food, farmers the world's ever had, without a written language. People followed the traditions by children working with the family in the fields, in the construction, whatever. So again, who defines education? And then it has to be compulsory. So how can you be free if something's compulsory? Education shall be directed to the full development of the human personality and to the strengthening of respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms. It shall promote understanding, tolerance, and friendship among all nations, racial or religious groups, and shall further the activities of the UN for the maintenance of peace. So now we have, again, development of the human personality. Well, who defines what that means? Respect for human rights and freedoms, but again, the contradictions are coming in, because who defines what is taking away another person's freedom? Tolerance, well, we know tolerance now is becoming intolerant, depending on what your view is. And then education shall further the activities of the UN and for the maintenance of peace. But since the creation of the UN, we've seen more wars than ever. Parents have a prior right to choose the kind of education that should be given to their children. So that sounds good. At least you have a prior right, but it's compulsory. So how can we define all this? So when something's compulsory, I'll flick through this with my own observations, really, because it's quite a lot to read. So when something's compulsory, you have to do it. So your child has to be educated. Now, according to the human rights, again, we'll go back. Parents have prior right to choose the kind of education. Now, it has to include the development of the personality. Now, In the UK, that's never been defined, and people have been free to choose to bring up their children as they see fit. Lots of places in Europe, even though in theory they've signed up to the UN Declaration of Human Rights, they don't allow homeschooling, or you have state permission. In the UK, it's always been free, but that's changing this year because the state now is defining education and saying who can and who can't homeschool. So they even break their own human rights because they're saying you're not doing it as we state you should. The personality development isn't going as we state it should. And now we know governments are run by, in general, at the highest level, child raping, warmongering crooks and liars and thieves, the most immoral people who don't believe in human rights. Look at my video in Whom We Trust. These utter warmongers who don't respect human rights at all. So your right to an education is another form of tyranny because only they are allowed to define what education is. So we have now the forced sexualization of children. You have no choice, you can't opt out. It's forced, forcing children to learn about all forms of sex. All these woke agendas are in school and you can't because it's official now. It's part of education because they say so. So everyone, Article 29, everyone has duties to the community, which allow the free and full development of his personality. In the exercise of his rights and freedoms, everyone shall be subject only to such limitations as determined by law. Solely for the purpose of securing due recognition and respect for the rights and freedoms of others, and of meeting the just requirements of morality, public order, and the general welfare in a democratic society. These rights and freedoms may in no case be exercised contrary to the purposes and principles of the United Nations. So you have duties in the community, obligations. So you can't be free if you have an obligation and a duty. You can't be free. So all these human rights are giving you an obligation. They're not freeing you. They're giving you obligations and duties. And again, who defines freedoms? Who defines, well, law is a man-made concept. It's not natural law. Who defines morality? And they're not talking about natural morality of do as you wish, but don't harm another person. You know, in English common law, we say, do no harm. I tend to add to that now, do no deliberate harm, because, you know, with all these new I'm offended things, just because I've spoken, well, you've caused me harm. Well, no, how you've interpreted what I've said as you've harmed yourself. So you have to expand English common law into do no deliberate harm because of the way things are going. And again, these rights and freedoms may in no case be exercised contrary to the purpose and principles of the UN. And the UN is pushing a global governance, a set of behavior and morals and laws that everybody has to abide by, and they lie through the teeth. The WHO is a part of the UN. And the green economy is part of the UN. The climate change nonsense is part of the UN. Free trade is part of the UN. So you've got the most immoral organizations. But remember, organizations are run by people. The organization itself can't be immoral. It's the people who are running it and who are destroying natural human rights. Yeah? So every time they define something, they give you an obligation. So morality, which they push, and human rights are actually tyrannical. They're completely tyrannical. And there's a lot of people who are pushing forms of morality, mainly religion, which is tyrannical. And the governments of the world are pushing human rights, which again are tyrannical, and people, activists, especially young ones, they get caught up because they believe the system is real. Oh, we want more, my right for this and my right for that. You're actually creating more enslavement by asking for more rights, because more rights are more obligations. Yeah, and they're obviously manifesting this. They want more political activists to create more rights in the illusion that they're selling more freedom, they're selling more tyranny. The more people can see through the whole nonsense of subjective morality and human rights, then we can start to see what I would say is natural morality. And I don't know what behavior is natural morality. I only know what it is for me. So what I would say is, as long as it's consensual as adults, do as you please, but don't impose it on another person. Own your decisions and the consequences of your decisions, and you will find out then if you're on your life path. Me having the right to follow my life path and not without interference is morally right. Human rights are so tyrannical because they're giving me obligations. Now, when you live in communities, you're always going to be organized. There are always going to be some modifications you'll have to make to live in a community, unless you want to live completely as a hermit on your own. But you shouldn't really be taken off your life path. You should have, society needs to be structured to promote freedom. But we know through human rights, man-made laws, man-made subjective morality, we're being enslaved by it. And people need to stop becoming activists for more human rights, because more human rights is just more tyranny.